let's move on into Joash or Jehoash. Joash reigned over Israel for a period of 16 years. But we also see that, like his fathers before him, he did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in all the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. They never learned their lesson. In fact, with Israel, it seemed that each generation got farther and farther away from God. Well, during this time, Elisha the prophet was nearing the end of his life. As we would say today, he was laying on his deathbed. He knew that he wasn't going to recover. But before he died, Joash came to visit. And from the way that I understand the text, it sounds like Joash came in and really made a fuss over Elisha. Just really gushed over him and praised him and just really showed him just tremendous honor that he had not shown him up to that point. He declared Elisha in 2 Kings 13:14 to be Israel's strength. Essentially, he was saying, if Israel's going to survive, it's going to be because of you, Elisha. You're the one that has helped us along, that has preserved us. But then Elisha commanded Joash to do something quite interesting. He tells Joash to take a bow and arrow, go to an east window, and to shoot an arrow out of that east window. And he tells Joash, he says, the arrow of the Lord's deliverance and the arrow of deliverance from Syria, for you must strike the Syrians at Aphek till you have destroyed them. So he's telling him, I'm about to die, but this is what you've got to do to overcome where you're currently at. To get this kingdom back where it needs to be, to do away with this oppression, you've got to go and you've got to fight against the Syrians at this one specific location. But then, Elisha tells Joash, now I want you to take some arrows and go outside and beat them on the ground. So Joash, he goes outside, and more than likely, it wasn't anything that he saw as being really significant, so he taps it on the ground 3 times and quits. Well, when Elisha found out that he had only done this 3 times and stopped, Elisha got angry, very angry. And he told Joash, you should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Syria until you had destroyed it. But now you will strike Syria only 3 times. Keep that in mind when we get to the end of this lesson, because we're going to make an application from that. Well, once again, as we talked about previously tonight, Syria had been oppressing this nation since the time of Joash's father, but God was gracious to Israel, would not allow Syria to come in and completely conquer that nation. He allowed the nation to continue to stand, and the reason for this, the text tells us, was because of the covenant that he had made with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. But then, you had a change of leadership in Syria. Hazael passes away, and his son, Ben-Hadad, rises to the throne. Well, Ben-Hadad, he goes in and he tries to carry out battles. Well, he starts to notice that he's losing territory. They have 3 battles. And in those 3 battles, Israel is victorious each time. They were able to take back a lot of the territory they had lost, but not all of it. Remember what Elisha said? He said, if you had hit the ground 5 or 6 times, said you would have had enough, you would have been able to go into battle enough times with God's blessing to completely get rid of these people. But since you only did it 3 times, you're not going to drive them completely out. But Syria wasn't the only nation that they were having to deal with. Because during this time, Amaziah was now the king of Judah. Amaziah had just recently led Judah in a victory over Edom, and pride was running rampant. Amaziah decides that he is now going to essentially piggyback off of Syria and go in and try to conquer some of the land from their brethren to the north. They're weak, they're vulnerable, they're fighting this other force. More than likely, Amaziah is not aware of the fact that God was now with them, strengthening them, helping them to overcome these battles. Well, when Joash receives this challenge to go to war with Judah, he sends a message back to Amaziah. And he says, the thistle that was in Lebanon sent to the cedar that was in Lebanon, saying, give your daughter to my son as wife. And a wild beast that was in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thistle. You have indeed defeated Edom, and your heart has lifted you up. Glory in that and stay at home. For why should you meddle with troubles so that you fall, you and Judah with you? Let me paraphrase that. He basically said, why are you messing with us? What have we done to you? Why would you come after us? But then the language that he uses, he says, don't you know it wouldn't take much for us to defeat you? Look at the language there. He's describing Judah as just a little thistle out in the wilderness. And he's describing Israel as this great towering cedar tree of Lebanon. He says, oh yes, you won a victory over Edom. He said, stay home and revel in that victory. Don't let your pride build up to the point that you come and try to wage war with a superior force, because you're not going to win. Well, as we see in 2 Kings 14, 11 through 12, Amaziah, he had his mind made up. In his mind, Judah could not be defeated at this point. And so the two armies, they come together, they face each other in battle at a place called Beth Shemesh, and Judah was easily defeated. But notice what happens next. Joash captured Amaziah. Then he goes to Jerusalem. He tears down part of the wall of the city, 400 cubits long, roughly about 600 feet. This left the city very vulnerable. But also he goes in and he takes all the gold, silver, and all of the precious articles that were used in the temple. Removes all of those things, removes the treasure from the king's house, and also takes people hostage and carries all of this back to Samaria. So not only are they defeated in battle, their capital city and the temple is ransacked. And the reason for that is because they let their pride get the better of them. Well, that's all we know about Joash. When Joash died, we're told that he was buried in Samaria along with the kings of Israel. And his son, another familiar name, Jeroboam, ascends to the throne. All right, let's look at a couple applications. Folks, don't take the easy way out or look for a shortcut. When Elisha told Joash to go and to beat the ground with the arrows, the way that I read that passage, he went out and just kind of half-heartedly did what the prophet told him to do. He wasn't passionate about it. He just went out there and just did the bare minimum. thinking, well, if I've done it 3 times, that ought to be good enough. Well, as a result, his success over Syria was not as extensive as it could have been. Elisha told him, said, right here, you had the opportunity to completely do away with Syria. But because you only gave half-hearted service, because you took the easy way out, you're not going to be successful. Folks, we need to understand that when there is something that we have been commanded to do, we don't need to look for a shortcut. We don't need to try to find an easier way, because the only way for us to maximize our effectiveness and our obedience is by doing all that we can to our greatest extent. All that we can to the greatest extent. And then the second lesson that we see, and this one should be obvious, folks, beware of pride. Judah allowed their victory over Edom to cause their pride to swell to the point that they felt they were invincible. So they issued a challenge to a much stronger nation, and they were defeated. Not only was their army defeated, but as we mentioned, they also faced the pillage of their city and the temple. You know, Amaziah would have done well to remember the words of his ancestor Solomon, who made a statement in Proverbs 16 and verse 18 that we're probably all very familiar with. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. All right, any questions up to that point? We don't have much time left, so I really don't want to get started with the next king, because we have a little bit more information about that king, so we'll spend more time on Amaziah. But any questions or comments before we stop tonight? All right.